Buongiorno Tania, questa settimana andiamo a parlare di peso e arrampicata, argomento molto delicato, andremo a vederlo da diverse sfaccettature. Partiamo da una sfaccettatura pessima, rattristante, rattristevole, così un po' impegnata, no? Le solite cose che siamo reclami, non mangiare, mangiare l'insalata, no? Andiamo a vedere prima di parlare di come fare per avere un giusto rapporto, andiamo a vedere cos'è un brutto rapporto. Io non sono certo in grado perché faccio l'ortopedico, ma mi vale introdurre questo argomento che comunque riguarda la patologia arrampicatoria, perché la patologia arrampicatoria non è solo dolore alla puleggia, l'epicondilite o la sindrome compressiva del piede. La patologia arrampicatoria è un po' tutto quello che sta attorno, una cosa molto ampia, e per questo che ci tengo questa settimana ad andare sulla pagina Facebook, sul gruppo Facebook, anzi, di Patologia Arrampicatoria. Iscrivetevi se non siete iscritti perché si fanno discussioni interessanti, che non sono solo di ortopedia e di traumatologia, si parla anche di molto altro. Quasi tutte le settimane affrontiamo un tema nuovo per quanto possiamo affrontarlo, perché io posso garantire un alto livello solo sull'ortopedia. E quindi voglio introdurre questo docufilm di Caroline Treadway. L'avrò pronunciato malissimo perché sapete che non sono anglo-arabile, ma so che voi siete anglo-abili, quindi non vi spaventerete se questo video è in inglese, anche perché potete attivare i sottotitoli su YouTube che funzionano praticamente benissimo, a livello di tecnologia è altissimo. Quindi guardiamoci insieme questo video, ne discutiamo poi sul gruppo tutti assieme, e fra 2 settimane, perché poi settimana prossima, lunedì, esce un video di patologia arrampicatoria serio, che se vediamo sempre condividete o cosa, votate sul sondaggio che c'è per decidere quale pubblichiamo. E il prossimo video non di patologia arrampicatoria seria, di patologia arrampicatoria ortopedica, traumatologica, ma di questo qua andremo a intervistare vari esperti. Vi sparo solo qualche nome: l'Adriana Sabal, Gianluca Bosetti, gente così, per andare a approfondire di più questo tema della problematica del peso, di questo rapporto che non sempre sanno che noi climber abbiamo col peso, e di come fare per avere un rapporto peso-potenza il migliore possibile. Ma guardiamoci questo video liked di Caroline Treadway.
When I first started writing for the climbing magazines, I pitched stories about this, but no one was interested. The editor said, "Don't bother. We won't run a story about eating disorders." That was over a decade ago. And in that decade, I told myself to get over it. No one wants to hear about eating disorders. Just don't talk about it. Total downer. And I never pitched a story about eating disorders again. But now it's time. We're going to talk about it. I ate too much yesterday. Yesterday, I gave in. Today, I will make up for it. I will not give in. They say I should gain weight, but they're just jealous. They just want what I have: the power to chew food and spit it out, to stick my finger down my throat, to starve myself. But if I start eating again, it will all go away. All that hard work for nothing. And I'll be back to average, boring, unspecial Caroline. Just need to lose 5 more pounds. Then I can stop. Then I woke up in the hospital. A few days later, I woke up in a different kind of hospital. They watched me, weighed me, fed me, gave me drugs, whatever ones I wanted. Then they let me out early for good behavior. But I wasn't better. During my time at the mental hospital, no one asked why I wasn't eating. No one mentioned the effects of starvation on the body and mind. No one seemed to know much at all about eating disorders, or how to recover from them. And a few months later, I was back in the hospital. I later learned the hospital's success rate for treating eating disorders was 2%. I was one of the 98%, but I felt like a freak. Then I got into climbing, and my entire world changed, starting with my body. I ate more, did my first pull-up, then 10, and for the first time since I was 8, I was proud of my body. proud of my muscles. I felt like I could do anything. Then I moved to Boulder, Colorado, where it seemed like everyone was on a diet. Everyone talked about what they ate or didn't eat. Everyone said they needed to train more. Everyone said, I'm fine, and she's fine, and he's fine. The worst part was, it worked. Over the years, climber after climber moved to Boulder, and within months dropped weight and climbed their hardest. It's like, is anyone else seeing this? Or am I just being too sensitive? Sometimes it felt like the whole sport was in denial. So I called up my friend Angie to see if she'd open up to me. I know Angie struggled with an eating disorder because I watched it happen. But although I've known her for 15 years, we've never talked about it before.
I know that I can't do that. I know that I can't go there. I can't just lose 5 pounds and be like, cool, that's it. Now I'll just be fine.
I first met Angie in 2003 when she moved to Boulder. Back then, the climbing scene was still pretty small. Everyone knew everyone. Angie was the baby of the crew, the prodigy.
Come on. Yeah, nice.
I started climbing when I was 11. I grew up in Cincinnati, Ohio, so I climbed in the gym mostly. I started competing almost right away. And then I moved to Colorado. I was like, oh man, fun's over. You gotta get serious. You gotta win.
That year, Angie went on a rampage and won every major U.S. bouldering comp. Actually, every comp she entered.
I can still remember a moment where I was climbing when I was really light. I just remember feeling like I was water over the rock. Just flowing over the rock so smoothly and so light. There's not another feeling like that.
A couple of months later, I saw Angie bouldering at the park. And I said to my friend, Angie looks really skinny. Do you think she's okay? And my friend was like, what are you talking about? Angie's in her prime. It was like, by asking if she was okay, I had become an enemy of the sport, a hater. Or maybe I was just jealous. Maybe I wasn't trying hard enough, wasn't hardcore enough, wasn't sacrificing enough.
When am I gonna train? What am I gonna eat? When is the next comp? Am I strong enough? Am I strong enough? Am I strong enough? Am I the strongest? Not am I strong enough? Am I the strongest? I knew that I was depressed, and I knew that I was like, this wasn't sustainable, but I was winning and I was climbing well. And so I had that to like hang on to. But now I look back and I'm just like, God, that was such a bad place. It was so miserable. You couldn't pay me to go back to that.
Good. What are you doing? This is our house.
Yeah, if we could just do a sync clap. Awesome.
I think I was so young at the time that I didn't really quite catch on to the whole like dropping weight thing. Like I just remember seeing Angie and being like, oh wow, she's dedicated. Like that's what dedication looks like. That's what passion looks like. Like that's what it takes to succeed, and that's what it takes to win.
The first time I met Emily was at the gym in Boulder. She was this crusher kid with platinum hair, cruising every hard climb in the gym, while her dad belayed, and her mom rode the exercise bike in the weight room. Emily was the pride of Boulder, the next generation, the future.
Growing up, my personality was always like, I want to be better than I am. I can be better than I am. This is what I'm meant to do, this is who I am, and I'm going to be the best at it.
Angie and Emily would define the edge of women's achievements in bouldering and sport climbing for years to come. And they were best friends.
Because you all like grew up climbing together.
Yeah, so we grew up climbing together in like the youth stuff.
Angie and I met when we were kids, and then we just like grew up competing together, and then she moved to Colorado, and then eventually we became roommates. We lived together for a few years, and we're super, super close friends.
She's one of my earliest climbing friends, I guess, because I've known her since the beginning, really.
Angie was like the queen of bouldering competitions. Like I remember that year when she won like every single bouldering comp she entered. She was just unstoppable.
and Emily was about to become the queen of sport climbing. That summer, Emily went to Europe to compete in the World Cup circuit.
You deprive yourself, you starve yourself, you drive yourself into the ground, and then you send. And that was the mentality back then. Like all the climbers I had seen before, like that was how they achieved success.
I had heard through the grapevine that Emily had lost weight, and in my mind I was like, oh no, here we go again. But when I saw her at the end of the summer at a comp in Boulder, I did a double take. It was Emily, all right, but a different Emily. And she won the comp that night.
Queen of the night, Emilia Vinton! Allez-y le public!
It feels like you've sort of unlocked this key to success, and the success feels so good. You know, maybe in the back of your mind that it's not healthy and that it's wrong, but good things are coming to you. So why would you stop? Why would you stop doing it? That success was the most important thing in the world to me at the time. And I would do anything to keep it.
Allez, let's go! On sait que ça va, c'est maintenant. Les gars, là, c'est pas facile pour elle, là. Come on.
That year, Emily got second at Worlds, sent 3 514s in rifle, and her career took off. But when I saw her training at the gym, she mainly just looked kind of unhappy.
Like, I just remember having no energy. I was so tired. I didn't like climbing. I was constantly worried about food. I was constantly worried about control and on being successful. Like, I was so focused on it. It was all I cared about. I could not see beyond it. I really couldn't. Angie wasn't around a whole lot. She just wasn't around. We didn't climb together. We didn't hang out.
We, when we were living together, it was too hard for me to be around it because I was kind of jealous and I didn't want to get sucked back in.
Even though you knew that this person was doing it, you could tell that they were doing it and you were doing it, and the whole community kind of praised you for doing it, you couldn't really talk about it. You couldn't really be honest about it. You had to pretend that everything was okay. You had to pretend that you were healthy. You had to pretend that that this was an acceptable way to live.
We couldn't even sit and talk to each other about how much we were each struggling at the time. And I would have considered her to be one of my closest friends then. And it was the big, huge, tiny, skinny elephant in the room.
And the two friends drifted apart. My own dreams of becoming a professional rock climber never really went anywhere. Too many injuries, and life took a different direction. I started writing, became a photographer, and I started shooting comps. But I had no idea how triggering that would be for me. Comp after comp, I watched top climbers get skinnier and skinnier and send harder and harder and get more and more praise from peers, coaches, and companies. But there was one moment in particular where it hit me hard. I was shooting a sport climbing nationals in Boulder when Andrea Seike tied in.
I remember going to some of these really high-level events and seeing some of the women that were really, really strong climbers at the time, and they were all super tiny.
Andrea Seike is a former youth national champion who's climbed up to 514B outside, but she's coming off a long...
Those were the people that I looked up to, and I think that has a really strong impression on a young upcoming climber who's very motivated. It's oh, okay, that's what I do.
Andrea was a super strong climber from Hungary, a couple of years younger than Angie and Emily. And I could tell she was serious about competing.
I've been climbing for 22 years, almost 23. I spent most of my childhood climbing in competitions.
She started up the wall, and I focused on her through the lens, then stopped, and lowered my camera. I wanted to push it away, and I didn't take a single photo of Andrea at that comp.
To me, it was just like I was putting in the work to be a strong climber, and that was my goal, and that's the only thing that mattered.
I knew that ignoring it didn't make it go away, but maybe if I didn't capture it on my camera, it was easier to forget about, easier to distance myself. It's not something I'm proud of, but at the time, it felt like a small victory.
I've been in that situation where I've seen people and I've been like, whoa, like, are we letting these people compete? Like, I don't understand this. That's just like, in turn, you're saying it's okay and we support you, where it's like, we really, time out, we should take a second. Like, if we really care about this person, we should address what's going on.
Looking back, most of my climbing heroes were pretty thin. I remember trying to find women who climbed hard and looked healthy. There were a few, but their rarity only seemed to prove the prevalence of disordered eating in the sport. And at some point, I stopped having heroes. But it wasn't just the stars of climbing who were restricting food. It was nearly all my friends in Boulder. It was more like the order than a disorder. Megan was one of the only women I knew in Boulder who didn't seem to go through this cycle, while so many of her friends and peers struggled. And I've always respected her for that, looked up to her.
I mean, we all made a big deal about like the blood doping for cyclists, but like honestly, an eating disorder is kind of on the same line. It's like you're doing something, you're deciding to do something that's harmful, but you think you're going to get a result from it. But then, like, kind of like an addict, you can't stop because you feel a certain way from it. You have to acknowledge that it's happening. And I feel like the first thing is everyone's in denial.
When you're going through it, it's like you're literally like, it's like you shut that door and you lock it and you do not let anyone in.
Everybody's like, something going on with that person, but nobody's saying anything maybe. And then if you're that person who has a problem, you're looking at everybody going, oh, they know something's up. Who's going to be the first one to say something about it? And how am I going to like convince them that I'm fine?
I think of like my relationship with my mom at that time and how she would try to like get me to eat more and be more healthy. And I would be so upset about it. I just like want to tell everyone to fuck off. Like, leave me alone. I just want to be good at climbing. And now I'm like, I can't believe how hard that must have been for her.
Have you ever approached a friend about this?
So I have had conversations with some friends about my concerns over their eating habits, and generally it's been really defensive and not in an aggressive way, like they weren't upset at me, but they were pretty much like, oh no, it's fine.
The commonest thing for someone with an eating disorder to say when approached is, I'm fine. I'm not that bad.
When I was in treatment, people like Dr. G didn't exist, at least that I knew of. I was 25 years too early and trapped in the dark ages, treatment-wise. So meeting her was pretty revolutionary for me, even all these years later.
So many of my patients have the tendency to look around and compare themselves to others and say, I'm not as bad as that person. So clearly, I'm not bad enough to change what I'm doing or go get help.
I had never even heard of Dr. G until about a year ago when my friend Katie Brown was like, you gotta check out this book, Sick Enough. Honestly, that was the last thing I wanted to do, but I figured I'd give it a couple minutes. So I downloaded the audiobook, got in my car, started listening, and pretty soon I started crying, like sobbing. Hearing all these stories of other people struggling brought up this deep sadness that I had kind of forgotten about, pushed away.
An eating disorder has the potential to be more powerful than love of family or God. And you have to take a moment to realize how powerful that is. It basically becomes like an abusive partner, but constantly in your head. And the meanness of it can't be over-exaggerated.
Finally, there were words for what I'd gone through. And I wasn't alone, like I'd felt for so long. And I wasn't over it, like I thought I was. Even I had turned away from the issue and the people who were suffering, turned away from myself. And I wondered, how long will this cycle continue? Will every young climber face this?
Are we all really that bad? Like, is our culture that fucked in climbing that we all have a certain level of, like, and then I thought about it and I was like, I mean, probably a lot of people do in climbing. And that's really like makes me angry at the sport, you know? But I don't know. I need to be more hopeful, I think. I'm just in a place where I'm just like a little bit overwhelmed by like, is anything even changing? Because I just witnessed this conversation last night. Like, it's like the kind of conversation that I dread hearing in the gym. And it was basically just like, it was actually two guys. They were basically just talking about counting calories and how to lose weight for climbing. It was like really, really, really hard to just sit there and be like, okay, I'm just gonna pretend that I don't hear. I'm just gonna, you know, and they're younger kids. And it made me just feel like, has nothing changed? Like, has it not changed at all? Is it just gonna be a cycle that repeats forever?
Maybe like Dr. G said, we were all on a spectrum of disordered eating, heading towards an eating disorder. It was hard to draw the line, hard to trace the origins, but I knew it wasn't just climbing. For me, at the beginning, it wasn't about climbing at all. And I remember the moment it started. It was August, and I was at the pool with my best friend. I remember my bathing suit was wet, and we squeezed into the front seat of the car together. I remember, ew, you have thunder thighs. I'd always been proud of my legs. I was on the diving team, swimming team, and I was especially proud of the muscles forming in my quads. But squished against my friend's perfect little toothpick legs, my thighs suddenly looked enormous, thunderous, and for the first time in my life, but certainly not the last, I despised my body. Soon, thunder thighs became, I'm not good enough. And I believed that for a long time. Too long.
There's a million different pathways into an eating disorder, but it does help educate how dangerous it can be for us to foist diet culture off, whether it's in a coaching relationship, a parent relationship, a sibling relationship, a partnership. Diet culture contributes dramatically to the incidence of eating disorders, which have a super high mortality rate and can steal years of someone's life.
Somehow, over the past few decades, climbing had gone from a few dirtbags doing visionary ascents in the mountains to a collective weight loss culture. And however that happened, one thing was certain. Diet culture wasn't going away and had, imperceptibly, become a way of life. Sometimes, to understand where we are, we have to look at where we've been. And when we can understand that, then we can choose a new path forward, a different path.
You know, all those skinny climbers who, I mean, before comps, I'm sort of really thinking a long way back, but, you know, it was beer and chip butties. And they all smoked cigarettes as well to try and keep their weight down.
Naomi was another positive role model for me in Boulder. She had kids and climbed super hard and didn't say negative things about her body. Instead, she said things like,
I'll look in the mirror and I'll think, God, I'm really heavy right now. And then I'm like, no, it's just a really bad mirror.
Naomi learned to climb from total legends like Joe Whitford and Peter Croft. And she was British champion in sport climbing in 1993, 95, and 96.
Punks in the Gym is a classic. Andy Pollett was trying Punks in the Gym.
Yeah, when I'm not climbing, I like to come out here and practice the didgeridoo.
And he lived in his trailer at the base of Mount Arapiles. So he used to smoke cigarettes, eat egg butties, and drink beer, you know, and that was the thing. Nobody had a clue about diet and climbing, really.
The practice of self-starvation dates back thousands of years. Monks and nuns who fasted for religious purposes, purity, transcendence. In other words, eating disorders have been around for a long time. They just weren't called eating disorders. In the late 1800s, when Sir William Gull coined the term anorexia nervosa, he said it mainly affected women, ages 16 to 23. He also said it affected men, but that part basically got forgotten about. Almost 150 years later, it's still often considered a female problem, mainly affecting white, affluent women. Emotionally based, a cry for attention, a control issue. Whatever it wasn't totally legit, and it wasn't something men got.
The vast majority of people with eating disorders in this country aren't seen. Someone in a larger body who may go into the doctor finally ready to say, I have anorexia, only for the doctor to say, it's time for you to go on a diet and lose some weight. Somebody who's non-white. People of color are not expected to get eating disorders, and they're missed. Somebody who's not wealthy, someone who's male, someone who's trans non-binary. These are the individuals who are getting missed.
In my experience, I knew just as many male climbers who struggled with eating as women. They just talked about it less. And most of them said I should stick to the women's side of the story. But wasn't that only half of it? So I waited. Months went by. A year. 6 more months. And then I came across a blog post written by a young climber from North Carolina, Kai Leitner. Climbing has given me moments in my life I will never forget, like standing on top of the podium in my first year of eligibility at Adult Nationals. I will also never forget staring at the scale before every competition. I will never forget rationing out the amount of calories I felt I could afford to eat before practice, so I didn't feel too fat to climb. I will also never forget the moment my doctor told me I was a fraction away from liver failure, and I needed to eat more if I wanted to survive.
Honestly, I've spoken to a lot of top climbers, guys who have struggled with this, but none of them agreed to be on camera. So I guess my first question is, do you think it's more taboo for guys to talk about this?
For men, talking about eating disorders, the problem is that in order to talk about them, you have to admit to being vulnerable. That's a really hard thing for a lot of men in society. And so we have to kind of debunk that association that being vulnerable means being weak, because there's nothing weak about asking for help. Actually, I think that's probably one of the strongest things you can do. And once we get past that, I think that we can have more open dialogue, even more accurate representation in numbers about how many guys do experience this and how we can mediate the situation.
Kai's climbing resume is impressive. He's climbed several 514s and won many bouldering and sport climbing comps across the world, starting from when he was young. Kai has a kind of old man wisdom about him, and in our interview, I feel more like I'm talking to someone twice my age than a 20-something-year-old.
For me, I was always bigger than all the kids my age. And so it was like constantly kind of drilled into me that I wasn't normal, quote unquote, and that I needed to be smaller.
It's always interesting to see the different physiques we got going here, Daniel, dude's jacked up, strong guy. Then you have Kai, long and lean. That guy is tall, okay? He's 14, I think he's 6 feet tall. But they're both at the top of their game right now.
And it was less for me about body image than it was about performance. I just wanted to be the best rock climber possible. And so I felt like the best and the easiest way for me to do that is to fit the mold that's already been set.
Here was this kid willing to talk about all this stuff that so many other climbers just wouldn't. Maybe Kai was proof that things were changing, and that gave me hope.
What do you think would have helped you? What would you say to somebody who is struggling?
I feel like the best thing you can do is just always be there, an open ear, an open hand, so that whenever they come to the realization they need help, they have someone to talk to. Everyone needs a support system. And for me, that was my mother as a kid. I mean, I grew up with a single mom as an only child, and so it was just us. And she was my surrogate coach. She drove me to the gym. She helped me with my homework. She cooked my meals. And so she was always there. And so she was the first person to notice when certain things weren't adding up. And so without her, I don't know where I would be, where my mindset would be with the sport.
I just wish that people would have felt more comfortable to get involved when I was like struggling. Cause I think that part of me really wanted that, cause I had isolated myself so much and I was like, I don't know how to come back from this. But I think that in our community, it's easier to just be like, yeah, they're just doing what they have to do to be the best. They'll get past it and they'll be fine. It's like, but what if they're not? And what if we all just stood here and watched it happen?
Which is exactly what I did with Angie, Emily, and Andrea. I wanted to say something, but I never did. And that was something I couldn't live with anymore. Why should I be quiet just because everyone else was?
Anyway, it had gotten bad. And I remember going in the bathroom and just like, it hit me. Holy shit, I am not healthy. Like something about seeing myself that time was different than like all the other times. And I realized like, oh my God, I have to do something.
Over the next year, Angie got to a healthier weight, but she wasn't going to give up on climbing hard and wasn't sure it was still possible.
I went up to the park a lot by myself to try European human being. And that was around the time when I was like on the road to, like gaining weight again and learning to climb in my body again.
I heard she was trying this problem in the park, a V12 that hadn't seen a female ascent. So I met her up there one day and we shot some photos on it. And a few days later, she sent it. Angie's next project was something even harder, the automator.
No! Oh, it's so hard.
That's why it's V13.
Ow! Fuck! God. Okay, I'm not gonna lie, I'm getting really frustrated.
And when she climbed it, she became the first woman in the world to climb a confirmed V13.
Holy shit.
In other words, she was basically the strongest woman in the world when it came to bouldering outside.
Fucking hell, Angie. Oh my God.
But I was still like in a it was kind of touch and go at the time, I would say, when I did automator, because I was still really struggling with like staying at that weight.
When you're recovering from something like an eating disorder or struggling with eating and coming out of it, there's so much like questioning and doubt. In my head, I was like letting myself go. I remember feeling a lot of shame. The climbing culture that sort of like praises like training harder, depriving oneself, like dropping weight, like getting as thin as possible so you can succeed. I feel like that was the type of culture that I was brought up in climbing. That I was exposed to that from a very young age. And I think that there is a level of trauma there for me because it was just so many years of being taught that was the path to success and that was how climbing had to be and that was how it should be. There is another better path. And there's proof of that.
Hi, I'm Angie Payne, and I'm climbing at the Vail Mountain Games.
What are some sacrifices you've made to make it to the high level where you are now?
Angie Payne has a posse. Let's hear it, people. Let's post her across this wall. Bring up.
Right before Angie sent the automator, she ran into Emily at a comp in Vail. It had been years since they'd been close, years since they'd really talked.
We didn't actually talk about it until we were in Vail for the Teva Games. I don't even remember what prompted it, but we sat down at this rib joint and we ate this basket of ribs together. And I apologized. I said, I'm sorry that I couldn't have, that I didn't know how to talk to you about it at the time. I know that you were struggling. I was just trying to like survive. That's probably like the beginning of when things really turned around for us, as friends, and all the fun started shortly thereafter, I think. Yeah, I guess I had forgotten how much that played a part in the road to recovery. It sounds so simple, but it was when I realized there was more to life than just climbing.
After both of us had kind of like been through it, she kind of like admitted to me that like the reason she wasn't around as much was because she couldn't handle being around me because she was still kind of like trying to recover. And I totally can relate to that.
I'm sure she looked at you and probably was like, God, I kind of wish I could do that too, but I know I can't.
Exactly. I still do that sometimes, just being honest. I'm like, damn, like maybe if I did that again, then I'd like send 14C. Like maybe I could, but no.
You're still sending 14C.
No, I've never have. That's my goal.
Oh, really?
I want to climb 14C, but I gotta climb El Cap in a day first, and I have to eat a lot in order to do that.
I haven't talked to her about it in a while, so I guess I can't put words in her mouth, but I think she's gotten past this in a really healthy way, it seems. And I'm sure maybe she still struggles sometimes with certain aspects of it, but she's somebody that I look to as like, okay, Emily's still being awesome and doing great things and not starving herself. She's really thrived, and it's really awesome to see that.
For Angie, recovery was a little more elusive. She was still weighing herself every day to make sure she hadn't dropped weight. She was still staying on guard. She was still thinking about it.
And that's where it feels like an addiction, where it's like, I don't know if an alcoholic feels that way when they see people drink, because I'm not an alcoholic, but I feel like when I see people lose weight, I'm like, I can't do that. Like, I can't do that in a healthy way. And so Freaks became sort of like the escape for me.
Freaks of the Industry is a line of crimps on a boulder that sits at 10,000 feet in Rocky Mountain National Park, Colorado. Most of the year, it's buried under snow. Dave Graham scoped the line in the early 2000s, and James Litz made the first ascent a few years later.
Just this pesky snow up here. There's a lot of it.
At the time, no women had climbed the boulder. I didn't even know of any women who had attempted it.
This is winter bouldering at its finest.
And then Angie started trying it.
The whole time, what I really wanted to do was not lose weight to do the boulder problem. Like, that was my thing, was like, I just didn't want to like drop a bunch of weight to do it, because I knew that that would just be like this unhealthy cycle that I would fall back into.
A mammal who's malnourished isn't going to be playful. They're not going to be creative, and they're not going to be adventurous. They're going to get really rigid, rule-bound, and serious. That's what happens to a lot of people when they've cut too much energy intake.
Up to this, and then you crimp, and then you get heel hook, and then this is like the crimpiest of crimps. And then it's pretty much straight up crimping. Nice. Okay.
This was like this weird time in my life when everything was like getting turned on its head. Just because I'm lighter doesn't mean I'm stronger at all. Usually it's the opposite.
I usually pick something, spend a lot of days working on it, depending on how things go, but I don't mind spending a lot of days on something.
And then as they continue to push courageously through, eating the stuff that was off limits before. Carbs, fats, proteins, enough nutrition altogether. They start to find, oh, my sense of humor's come back. My sex drive's come back. My sense of confidence in myself has come back. That asshole voice in my head that was being so mean to me and so perfectionistic yeah, that's a lot quieter now. All of this can turn around.
Come on. Relax, Angie. Come on.
So I did it like 60 something days later, 3 seasons later.
I just did it! Oh my God.
And I did it at a healthy weight without losing any weight. And that was a big success for me. Yeah, it was a cool one for me. Feeling light feels amazing. Everybody who's felt that knows how amazing that feeling is. But what I realized once I started gaining weight again and getting healthier was that you can get that feeling by being strong. And feeling really strong feels even better than feeling really light.
You can fully recover from an eating disorder. Anyone can fully recover from an eating disorder. Any given day can be the last day you're doing these behaviors to yourself. And it's hard. It is a street fight. It is a shit show. But it can happen. And your quality of life can get so much better. Your relationship with your sport can get so much better. That mean, abusive voice in your head can go away completely. You can live free.
When Dr. G said that, it was the first time I had ever heard that it was possible to recover from an eating disorder. And maybe that matters more than I realize. It's crazy to think that in all the noise, one comment, even an offhanded one, can completely change your life, change your fate, like thunder thighs.
I really like that Dr. G says, like, it's possible to recover. And I also don't feel like I've gotten there, honestly. And I'm like, how long is it gonna take? Because it's been almost 18 years now. Like, can we get there already? Yeah, I think that it's just a process of learning and being more open, and then learning how to have the conversations. Mm-hmm. Like kind of stumbling through it until it becomes more common. So I guess maybe we're just in the stumbling part, but at least we're doing it. This feels way better than all of the years that it was a secret. So I've come a long way.
For me, recovery has been a gradual deprogramming. There was no pill or hospital or therapy session. There was no miracle epiphany. I just made peace with it over time, made peace with myself. And it's taken a while. Now, I'm proud of my thighs. Now, I feel good enough. Sometimes even great. Which is awesome. But it's not just about me. And it's not just about my pro climbing friends in Boulder. It's about all of the people going through this alone, without friends or family or therapy or support from someone like Dr. G, people who don't have a community like climbers do. So how do we break the cycle for everyone?
I'm sure I influenced young girls. People saw me drop a bunch of weight and then succeed. And so they probably like followed suit. And that's, you know, in a way, I'm responsible for that. But now that I'm in this position of like recovering from it and coming out of it, I feel like it's my responsibility to come forward and to say like, yeah, that wasn't the proper approach. It's not the way forward.
When I was first eating more, it was still in the back of my brain that like I'm gaining weight, this isn't good for me. But eventually I had to realize, okay, the bigger I get, the stronger I get, and the better I am at climbing. And that was definitely like something that I had to see to believe.
I'm 34 years old and I climb just as hard now at this body weight, at this age. I actually climb harder than I did when I was 18 years old. So I think that I'm like a testament to the fact that you don't have to starve yourself in order to like send. I just feel like it could be so different. It could be so much better for the future generation, provided that we can talk about it.
I know that my story is just one story in a multitude of stories that will never be told. I know I'm the stereotype, and I didn't get missed. So this is just the beginning, really. The beginning of the story. The beginning of the listening. One step in the darkness. And each voice, a light along the path. And one day, when enough of those voices join together, the darkness will lift. Like it always does.
Call it what you will. Call it apathy. Call it greed. Call it what you will. Just fine with me. Call it what you will. Call it man. Call it what you will, just fine with me. There is nothing fundamentally wrong. You feel unusually perfectly calm. Your mind is clear and your heart is strong. No one's giving any bad advice. For once, you didn't stop and think twice. 'Cause